Hi, welcome back to A Second of Context with Dr. Rosner. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of the magazine in American culture. Now, of course, we know that the first magazine published in the colonies was 1757 by the Bradford family. Nevertheless, the magazine didn't last that long, and that's because it was just too expensive to circulate. Moving forward, two favorable postal acts at the end of the 18th century, in 1792 and 1794, allowed magazines to circulate at a more favorable postal rate. Several magazines did begin to emerge around this time, but prices were high, and as a result, there was just an elite audience for these magazines. Some examples include the New York Magazine, or the Portfolio, which was the nation's first real literary magazine. Nevertheless, we saw by the 1830s some developing niches in the magazine industry. Magazines that were designed to go to audiences of men, women, and children. We're going to focus now on the Woman's Magazine. So, by the middle of the 19th century, more than 800 women's magazines were circulating throughout American culture. These magazines were started in the 20s and 30s, initially by men, male publishers and editors, who were delivering prescriptive advice to women about how to manage a household. As you might imagine, women didn't like this very much. As a result, those male publishers decided to hire women as editors. One of the first and best examples of this is Sarah Hale, who published Godey's Ladies Book from the 30s until she retired from her role in the 1880s. In this magazine, Sarah Hale, even though she was a paradox, someone who was working outside of the home, she really emphasized notions of the cult of true womanhood. So in other words, that women were inferior to men, that they were somehow more pure, that they should be more submissive, they were somehow weaker, less intelligent. She perpetuated this logic. Even though she was a paradox, someone who defied the gender norms of the day, she was not an advocate of women's rights. Instead, in this particular magazine, she ran anti-suffragist logic. Not until the 1880s, when Sarah Hale's successor, Jane Cunningham Crowley, better known as Jenny June, took over the magazine, did we start to see other mindsets. This idea that women should emerge outside of the sphere of the home, that they should be able to participate in the public sphere. Ultimately, we also saw in the reporting of Jenny June, Jane Cunningham Crowley, more support for women's rights and women's suffrage. Now, we mentioned the 1880s, but it would be the 1890s before we started to see the circulation of women's magazine at a mass scale. And that was largely the result of the policy of Cyrus Curtis, who was able to drop single issue prices from a quarter to a dime because he embraced advertising. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you for sharing in A Second of Context with Dr. Rosner.